I was having dinner at a restaurant last night, and wow, a few tables over caught my attention. Or really, he was a guy. You couldn't ignore him because he was so clearly performing.
Oh, one of those.
Totally. He's sitting there with this rigid, frozen posture, shoulders all hiked up, and he would not break eye contact with his date. It looked less like romance and more like an interrogation.
That sounds intense.
It was. And when the waiter came over, he didn't just order, he barked commands.
Yeah.
He cut the server off, ordered for the woman without even asking what she wanted. Right. He just kept scanning the room with this intense, unblinking stare.
Building persona.
Exactly. You could practically hear him thinking, this is what an alpha does. This is dominance. But from the outside, the effect was it was jarringly different. He didn't look powerful. He looked terrified.
Ah, there it is.
That rigid posture, right? That's not control. That's a sympathetic nervous system in overdrive.
Yeah.
I mean, in the wild, the animal making the most noise, frantically inflating its size, that's not the apex predator.
That's the pufferfish.
It's the pufferfish. The lion, the actual threat, is usually relaxed, just conserving energy. This guy thought he was playing the part of a king. But to anyone with, a basic grasp of biology, he was just loudly signaling that he was prey.
And that's what we're talking about today, isn't it? This Pufferfish Paradox.
Exactly. Destroying your own status by trying way too hard to fake it.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've got some fascinating material here that really dives into the core difference between seeming powerful and actually being powerful using biology, game theory, the whole lot.
Right. What we're really exploring is the strategic error of performative dominance. It's an evolutionary misstep where these high-friction, really visible attempts to assert your status, they just achieve the exact opposite.
So we're going to get into the evolutionary theories.
We are. We'll synthesize a couple of big ones, specifically the dual strategies framework and the handicap principle, to show you why these high-friction, cheap signals fail so disastrously, whether it's in your social life, at work, or even dating.
And then we'll get into the why, the psychology behind it.
Exactly. We'll peel back the layers to see the deep psychological roots, which are often anxiety-driven, and then we'll wrap up with some actionable psychological strategies to move from that performance to a more authentic, secure competence.
Okay, so the first step in understanding this whole pufferfish paradox is realizing that status isn't just one thing. It's not monolithic. Humans, like a lot of social animals, we've evolved two major, fundamentally different ways to gain influence.
And that's captured in what's called the dual strategies theory.
Dual strategies.
That's our necessary starting point. I mean, you can define status as just your rank or influence in a group, but the method you use to get it dictates everything. Its stability, its impact on the group, everything. And evolutionary psychology shows these two pathways have, they've been conserved for millennia because they both can work. They just work for entirely different reasons.
So let's define the older, more primal path first.
Yeah.
That would be dominance. This seems to be the one our guy in the restaurant was trying to emulate.
Dominance is status that is taken. It's not given. It's achieved by using force, or at least the implied threat of force. Coercion, intimidation, and, crucially, selfishly, withholding vital resources from the rest of the group.
So it's all about control.
It's a strategy rooted in fear. It's identified by a constant desire for authority and really rigid control. And it works because it leverages that immediate fear response in other people. It compels obedience.
But if you lead through fear, you're just creating a group of reluctant followers, right? They're not loyal. They're just complying until they don't have to anymore.
Precisely. And that's why dominance-based leadership is inherently unstable. The leader has to constantly spend metabolic energy just to maintain that coercion.
They can never let their guard down.
Never. The moment that dominant individual shows a hint of weakness, a lapse in vigilance, an illness, a critical mistake, the followers who've been kind of biding their time, they can coordinate to suppress or dethrone them. The stability depends entirely on the leader's constant, visible performance of strength.
Okay, so then prestige is the complete inversion of that dynamic. If dominance is status you take.
Prestige is status that's conferred, it's given to you.
How does that work?
Prestige is earned. You get it by demonstrating traits that the group genuinely values. So this is status built on admiration, respect, and freely given influence. It's acquired through high levels of skill, specialized expertise, a kind of collaborative generosity, and the crucial ability to teach those skills to others. That's a big one.
So you're not just skilled, you actively make everyone else better. You don't hoard your knowledge, you distribute it.
That's the key evolutionary advantage of prestige. It fuels what you could call distributed intelligence. A prestigious leader actively makes the entire group smarter and more capable. They multiply the benefits of their own skill,
Which results in a win-win.
it's a mutually beneficial outcome for the leader and the group, which makes that leadership far more stable and long-term. Followers willingly support that leader because that leader is a net positive for their own survival and their own success. The incentive isn't fear, it's cooperation.
So we have the unstable, high-friction, fear-based dominance, and then the stable, high-trust, collaboration-based prestige. This contrast brings us right back to the core problem of the pufferfish, signaling. Because if you're going to signal dominance, that signal has to be trustworthy.
And this is where the Handicap Principle becomes our essential tool for analysis. It was proposed by a biologist, Ahmad Sahavi, and this principle. It's really the ultimate litmus test for honesty in biological communication and, by extension, in human communication, too.
I love this idea because it just cuts through all the noise. So what does it demand? What makes a signal reliable?
It demands that the signal must be costly to produce. It has to cost you something.
Costly how?
Well, if a low-quality individual could easily fake the signal would quickly lose all its meaning. It would become unreliable and, worthless in evolutionary terms. So the signal has to literally cost the sender fitness or resources.
Okay, give us the classic example from nature that proves this. The one that shows cost equals credibility.
The male peacock's tail. It's the classic. It is a massive, cumbersome appendage. It makes flying difficult, it requires enormous metabolic energy to grow and maintain, and it makes the peacock way more vulnerable to predators.
It's a huge liability, a handicap.
It's a literal handicap. A weak or sick peacock cannot afford the energy it takes to maintain that tail and survive. Therefore, the tail is an honest, trustworthy signal of underlying genetic fitness and resource availability. The ability to afford to squander that resource is the signal.
And we apply this to human behavior all the time, don't we?
Yeah.
Particularly with conspicuous consumption. The luxury car, the huge house, the expensive watch.
It's the same principle.
It signals, I could afford to burn this resource, so you know I have plenty more where that came from.
Exactly. The expenditure itself is the guarantee of honesty. But, and this is important, we need to expand our view of costly signals beyond just material wealth. The true costly signal of, let's say, high status in the modern world is often related to time and psychological security.
Meaning, the ultimate flex isn't buying a Rolex, it's having the ability to relax enough to not feel like you need to be busy or performing all the time.
Absolutely. The true signal of secure status is having the psychological freedom to allocate your time toward non-productive activities. Contemplation, rest, reading for pleasure, genuine playfulness. You can do that because you're not under constant threat. A person who is constantly projecting busyness or always rushing is, in fact, displaying a cheap signal of low status. They're signaling frantic resource scarcity.
So, if the peacock's tail is the costly signal, what does that make the aggressive posturing of our pufferfish?
Yeah.
The high-friction stuff.
Those rigid behaviors, the yelling, the micromanagement, that unblinking stare, they are fundamentally cheap signals.
Cheap because anyone can do them.
They cost zero genetic fitness, zero competence, and very few material resources to mimic. Any terrified middle manager or any insecure person on a date can bark a command or try to strike an alpha posture. The low cost of production ensures the signal's reliability is zero. It's all noise, no lethality.
Which leads us to the definition of what real power is. Resource holding potential, or RHP.
RHP, right. It's the actual fighting ability or the resource base of an organism. And true, high RHP is characterized by two things: metabolic conservation and the absence of unnecessary movement.
This is the lion, isn't it? The difference between the lion and the frantically puffing fish.
It is the lion, the apex predator, the silverback gorilla calmly grooming its troop. The lion resting in the sun is relaxed. Their default state is conservation of energy. That relaxation is the true high-cost signal.
What's it signaling?
It demonstrates that the organism is not under threat. It doesn't need to inflate or posture because its strength is innate and it's known. The capacity for playfulness, in fact, is one of the most powerful biological signals of high RHP. It shows you have massive energy reserves to spare.
The pufferfish, then, is exhibiting the exact inverse of all of that.
Yes, that rigidity, the high friction, the need for constant active maintenance of his status, it loudly signals a sympathetic nervous system in overdrive. We are seeing high cortisol levels, hypervigilance, and a nervous system just keyed up for fight or flight. True power is quiet and conserved. Everything else is just performance anxiety disguised as frantic inflation.
So we've established that this pufferfish strategy using cheap, high-friction signals is a failure at an evolutionary level because it's signaling anxiety, not RHP. Let's bring this into the modern world, starting with the corporate pufferfish. This has to be the definition of performative leadership.
Performative leadership is one of the most insidious forms of cheap signaling in the modern workplace. It really is. It's the act of playing the role of a leader, focusing so intensely on style and presence and polished communication without embodying the core responsibility of leadership.
Which is substance.
Which is substance, practice, and shared competence.
So it sounds like pure impression management. The leader is focused entirely on curating how they're perceived. Optics become the currency, and authenticity just becomes theater.
That is precisely the mechanism. The performative leader spends vast amounts of energy ensuring they look like they're in control. They use excessive jargon, they insist on their own methodology, they take all the credit, all while often remaining completely detached from the actual outcomes or the developmental needs of their own team.
We talk about psychological safety, but their actions create fear.
Exactly. Their behavior fosters rigidity and fear. And this brings us to that story of Marcus and Sarah, which just perfectly illustrates how volume is used to mask a competence gap.
Okay, so tell us about them.
So Marcus was a mid-level director. His primary leadership tool was just sheer volume, an aggressive use of industry jargon. He would dominate every meeting, confusing high sound pressure with high status. His team walked on eggshells around him.
Like we've all had that boss.
We have. Then a critical server failure actually took down the company's entire platform. We're talking potentially catastrophic losses.
And this is the moment of truth, right?
Correct.
The cheap signal should be replaced by a costly, competent response. But Marcus, he defaulted to inflation.
He did. The minute the crisis hit, Marcus went into full pufferfish mode. He started yelling about accountability, threatening firings, demanding immediate fixes without having any idea of the underlying technical architecture. It was pure noise.
Masking the fact he didn't know what to do.
He was masking his deep, fundamental lack of technical understanding of the system failure. He was spending all his energy on the performance of leadership, not the act of problem solving.
So who showed the genuine RHP in this situation? Who had the competence?
The savior was a quiet back-end engineer named Sarah. She didn't engage in the performance at all. She didn't feel the need to posture or to yell. She simply put on her headphones, opened up the terminal, and wrote the necessary patch to restore the system.
Wow.
Sarah saved the company millions of dollars with pure, quiet competence. And in that moment, for everyone in the room, Marcus's illusion just popped. His yelling was instantly exposed as a stress response, not authority.
And it goes beyond just the crisis, right? These dominant leaders, especially the ones whose status is fragile, they can actively damage the infrastructure of the team to preserve their own position.
That is the corrupt strategy of dominance. Absolutely. Dominant leaders, especially when they feel internally threatened by a highly competent subordinate like Sarah, will use self-serving tactics that actively hurt team cohesion.
Like what? What would they do?
They'll restrict communication channels among their subordinates to prevent any collaboration that could challenge their authority. They might physically isolate their most skilled team members or deliberately withhold crucial information from the group.
All to stay in control.
All to ensure that competence remains siloed, which preserves their central but very fragile position of power.
We should pause here, though, and acknowledge that dominance isn't always ineffective. I mean, there have to be some scenarios where this high-friction approach might actually work best.
That's a crucial distinction, and it's based entirely on the nature of the task. Research confirms that dominance can yield better, faster results in tasks requiring what's called convergent thinking.
Convergent thinking, meaning there's one single correct solution, often under serious time pressure, like a military operation or an emergency medical response.
Precisely. In those scenarios where efficiency and clear top-down direction are paramount, the dominant approach can be effective. But the moment the task shifts to requiring creativity, innovation, or divergent thinking,
where there are multiple possible solutions,
and psychological safety is essential for idea generation, the prestige approach is consistently the superior leadership method. Prestige leaders solicit input, they empower innovation, and they create a climate where risky ideas are rewarded, not punished.
Okay, so moving from the boardroom to the friend group, let's talk about the status signals paradox and social affiliation. This one is entirely counterintuitive. Trying to look rich or high status actively repels potential friends.
It's a robust finding in social psychology, and it's a direct consequence of the pufferfish's cheap signaling strategy. People who are seeking new friends consistently believe that visible high-status markers, luxury cars, designer clothes, expensive watches, will make them more attractive and desirable. But the data shows the exact opposite happens.
My first thought is that a successful person would be an asset to a friend group. Why would that status actively trigger avoidance?
It boils down entirely to one thing: disadvantageous social comparison.
An ego threat.
It's an ego threat, not a physical one. When a would-be friend, the evaluator, sees that high-status marker, it triggers a threat. They're thinking, if I become friends with this person, I will constantly feel inferior or competitive or just disadvantaged in comparison to them. They're predicting a cost to their own self-esteem, so they choose to avoid that comparison entirely by not forming the friendship.
Can you walk us through some of the data on this? Because it's really striking how consistent the rejection is.
For sure. So consider the car study. When researchers asked people what car they would display to attract new friends, 65.6% of them chose the luxury car, like a BMW.
Makes sense. You want to look successful.
But the evaluators, the potential friends, they preferred the driver of the basic car, like a Honda, by a significant margin. Friendship interest scores were 5.38 for the basic car driver versus only 3.83 for the luxury car driver. The attempt to inflate status caused a deep deficit in likability.
And they even controlled for aesthetics, right? Using minimal signals.
Yes, the plain white t-shirt study, they used shirts branded only by the retailer. Saks Fifth Avenue for high status versus Walmart for neutral status. 76% of people chose the Saks shirt to look more likable.
And the result?
Over 60% of evaluators preferred the Walmart t-shirt wearer as a friend. The status signal, even when it's stripped down to just a minimal social cue, actively diminished likability. It's a true paradox.
But the paradox disappears when the goal changes. And that kind of validates the whole theory, that it's rooted in social comparison and emotional safety, not just a general dislike of wealthy people.
Exactly. The researchers ran a third study where they shifted the goal from social affiliation making friends to professional competence, making business contacts.
And what happened?
In that scenario, presenters overwhelmingly chose the luxury car, 90% of them. And the evaluators mirrored that preference. They recognized the luxury car as a signal of competence they wanted to leverage professionally, but they actively avoided that same person when they were seeking emotional and social support. The pufferfish is desirable as an asset, but toxic as an affiliate.
So the final modern context here is the digital pufferfish, which is just dominating the online mating marketplace. This is where the cheap signal is really cranked up to 11.
Absolutely. I mean, you can picture it, right? The archetypal crypto king profile you might see on a dating app. It's a montage of performative dominance.
The unsmiling selfie.
The rigid posture, maybe a photo next to a rented car, stacks of money strategically placed on a table, and a bio that says something like, alphas only. It's the pinnacle of the cheap signal. It costs no actual competence or long-term resources to stage those photos, and so its reliability is zero.
And what does that kind of aggressive posturing signal to a potential partner, particularly to a female observer?
It signals instability and high risk. To the evolved observer, this aggressive posturing isn't read as confidence. It's often interpreted as a shield for deep social anxiety and resource scarcity.
The underlying message being,
I need to perform this loudly because I'm terrified I don't actually measure up. It triggers a danger or high maintenance radar. It suggests a partner whose status is so fragile it requires constant validation and defense, which leads to rejection for long-term prospects.
and this requires us to bring in the concept of strategic pluralism. Dating choices aren't one size fits all. They're driven by a specific evolutionary goal.
That's vital to understand. Women exhibit a very clear trade-off in mate selection based on the time commitment. Research shows a preference for dominant men for short-term sexual affairs.
Why is that?
Because dominance, even if it's unstable, signals high genetic quality. The male is visibly strong, able to acquire resources, and that translates to potentially healthy offspring. It's a genetic calculation.
But that calculation shifts completely when you're considering a partner to actually raise those offspring with.
Precisely. When seeking a long-term romantic relationship, women strongly prefer prestigious men. Prestige signals reliability, stable resource provision, cooperative behavior, and the ability to contribute to the group's success. The aggressive pufferfish, by forcing conflict and showcasing his instability, actively disqualifies himself from that reliable long-term partner category. He signals high risk and a high cost of maintenance.
So we've really established that the pufferfish strategy is a strategic and evolutionary failure. But the fundamental question remains, why? Why do people resort to these transparent, destructive performances? And the answer, as you hinted at the start, is rooted in deep anxiety and fragile status.
We have to go back to the physical manifestation of the performance. The rigid posture, the forced hypervigilance, the refusal to look away. These are not conscious choices of powerful people. They are physical symptoms of deep internal stress. They're biological giveaways.
So the physiological truth is that a man who refuses to break eye contact or barks commands is actually signaling that his sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive.
That's the high cortisol cost. The body, when it perceives a threat, whether it's external or internal, it tenses up. It adopts a ready posture. This tensing is the evolutionary mechanism for fight or flight.
And when an individual adopts that posture in a safe social setting, like a restaurant,
They are honestly signaling that they are under immense internal threat, even if that threat is purely psychological, like the anticipation of humiliation. This sustained physical tension and hypervigilance is the ultimate honest signal of internal fragility.
that realization just changes the whole narrative. The pufferfish isn't a bully acting from a position of strength. He's a survivor acting from a position of fear. And often, that fear is rooted in childhood trauma.
We see a very strong connection between this kind of performative dominance and the trauma of conditional acceptance. It's often linked to children raised in hypercritical, demanding environments, sometimes due to narcissistic parenting.
How does that kind of environmental conditioning create the adult pufferfish?
Well, the child grows up experiencing hypercriticism and constantly shifting unrealistic expectations. Their fundamental self-worth becomes entirely contingent on their output, their grades, their achievements, their adherence to rigid rules.
And they internalize a brutal set of messages from that.
A brutal set. Messages like, vulnerability is unsafe, free self-expression must be repressed, and failure is tied to being fundamentally unworthy. The child learns that performance is the only pathway to safety and acceptance.
Which creates a severe, chronic form of social and performance anxiety in their youth.
It can manifest as panic attacks, severe social avoidance, withdrawal from group activities, and then in adulthood, this conditioning results in classic self-sabotaging behavior.
How does that look?
These adults become so risk-averse that they actively pass up opportunities. Career promotions, high-level networking, even dating. They avoid it all simply to avoid the anticipated catastrophic humiliation they were conditioned to expect if they failed to perform perfectly. They substitute genuine social connection with constant, exhausting theater.
And when this chronic anxiety response is left untreated, it can often evolve into something much deeper than just bad nerves.
That's right. It's often a form of a complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, and we have to understand the complex part of that. This isn't a single acute trauma. It's chronic relational trauma that deeply damages a person's self-esteem and identity.
And many survivors of this environment don't even recognize it as trauma.
They struggle to. They don't see that their anxiety, their need to perform, their hypervigilance is a trauma response. They often default to self-blame, which just compounds the anxiety and shame. And that, in turn, leads to maladaptive coping mechanisms like addictive behaviors or, well, compulsive performance to self-soothe or dissociate from the painful emotions. The pufferfish is essentially trapped in a highly maladaptive coping cycle.
Okay, so if the core problem of the pufferfish paradox is anxiety, avoidance, and performance as a maladaptive trauma response, then the solution has to be to dismantle that avoidance. This is where evidence-based interventions like exposure therapy come into play.
Exposure therapy is the gold standard. It's the evidence-based pathway away from the avoidance behaviors that maintain all forms of anxiety, including this pufferfish paradox. It requires the individual to confront their fears in a safe, systematic way, gradually breaking the learned association between a stimulus and a catastrophic outcome.
What are the fundamental psychological associations that need to be broken for the pufferfish to deflate safely?
There are two main goals. First, the individual has to break the belief that the anxiety-producing situation, say, admitting a mistake at work, actually warrants the level of fear they feel. And second, and this is crucial for the pufferfish, they have to break the belief that they need their anxiety-reductive rituals to manage the situation.
The ritual being the aggressive performance.
The ritual is the inflation, the aggression, or just the complete avoidance of vulnerability. The therapy aims to show them that they can survive and even thrive without that performance shield.
And we have a really compelling case study that demonstrates the power of this therapy, even against the most severe forms of social inhibition.
We can look at the treatment of selective mutism, which is a severe variant of social anxiety where children struggle to speak in certain social settings. There was a notable case study involving a 12-year-old boy, James, who exhibited profound inhibition. He only spoke reliably to his immediate family members.
And medication hadn't fully worked for him.
Right, which illustrates the severity of the psychological barrier. So, over 21 weekly therapy sessions, James was systematically exposed to increasingly difficult social interactions in a very controlled environment.
So they didn't just force him to talk.
No, not at all. The therapist created incentives and a gradual exposure to speaking with unfamiliar adults, strangers, teachers, other students. The process was rigorous and systematic, slowly dismantling his core belief that speaking to non-family members was fundamentally unsafe.
And what was the measure of success? What happened?
James fully recovered his ability to communicate verbally in all environments. He went from severe inhibition to speaking freely with strangers, teachers, and family members. Critically, these profound gains were maintained at a 3-month follow-up. It demonstrates that even deeply ingrained, trauma-driven social inhibition can be successfully treated. It proves that the pufferfish can deflate and function securely.
That recovery is the transition to secure social signaling. The cure for inflation starts with the terrifying act of admitting weakness. Let's talk about Leo, the executive who learned this lesson.
Leo is a classic example of the high-functioning corporate pufferfish. He was successful on paper, but he suffered from the constant exhaustion of inflation. He believed, based on his childhood conditioning, that admitting any mistake or displaying ignorance would instantly end his career.
Which forced him into that constant performance.
Constant interruption, feigning expertise, aggressive posturing to maintain the illusion of infallible control. It was exhausting for him and his team.
So his coach gave him a simple but terrifying intervention. Try admitting a mistake in a high-stakes meeting.
Exactly. Leo was instructed to say, "I missed that point. Can you help me understand?" He went into that meeting anticipating humiliation, professional ruin. But when he forced himself to say the phrase, something powerful happened.
What?
The tension in the room just instantly relieved itself. His teammates didn't pounce. They saw genuine curiosity and security. He demonstrated the profound internal security required to deflate, and it transformed him from a rigid performer into a curious, collaborative leader.
This realization has massive implications for the people surrounding the pufferfish, whether they're partners or colleagues or parents. They have to stop enabling the avoidance.
That's the critical component of reducing accommodation. In anxiety treatment, accommodation refers to all the ways in which others change their behavior to help the anxious person avoid their fear.
So for an adult pufferfish, that might look like a colleague always covering their technical gaps.
Or a partner always ordering their meals for them at a restaurant. Accommodation unintentionally exacerbates anticipatory anxiety because it sends a message to the individual that the situation is, in fact, too dangerous for them to handle alone. It reinforces the fear.
So if you stop enabling the avoidance, you have to replace that support structure with positive reinforcement for the steps they take towards competence.
That is contingency management. Instead of reinforcing the avoidant behavior by protecting them, you positively reinforce the desired behaviors, even the smallest steps. For James, it was verbal praise for reaching milestones in his fear hierarchy.
And in the adult context.
It means positively reinforcing the display of genuine curiosity or relational honesty, or the admission of a mistake, just as Leo's team subconsciously reinforced his new behavior by offering help instead of judgment. This facilitates motivation away from the destructive pufferfish behaviors and toward genuine earned competence.
Which brings us back full circle to what true leadership and influence actually require, moving away from all that theatrical performance.
True leadership demands restoring the connection between rhetoric and action. It is the antithesis of the pufferfish. It requires the security to be emotionally available, to be relationally honest, and to be curious enough to actually listen and distribute knowledge. It's not about style, it's about consistency. Because consistency, the repeated demonstration of reliability and competence, is the only thing that builds credibility. And that's the non-negotiable foundation of enduring social influence.
We started with that jarring, tense image of the man performing dominance at the restaurant, mistaking rigidity for control. Our deep dive has shown that the Pufferfish Paradox is a strategic error, and it's rooted in failed evolutionary signaling and fueled by profound anxiety and fragile status.
These desperate, high-friction attempts to signal status, whether it's in the office with jargon or on a date with aggressive posturing or through the display of luxury goods, They're just cheap signals.
And they express deep insecurity, ultimately destroying the very social capital they're trying to gain.
Right. So when you observe overly rigid, aggressive, or loud behavior, you are almost always witnessing not command, but fragility. The constant performance is biologically and strategically expensive. It costs the performer their energy in the form of high cortisol, and it costs them their credibility through these unreliable signals.
It's the opposite of true resource holding potential.
It is the antithesis of what we see in creatures who are secure in their innate strength and competence.
We've seen that true power is quiet, conserved, and stable, and that escaping the paradox requires confronting the anxiety and finding the courage to finally deflate, replacing that avoidance with secure, collaborative competence.
The true high-cost signal of power in the modern social world is not the ability to project unwavering control. That's the realm of the cheap signal. The high-cost signal is the profound security demonstrated by the capacity to relax, to be present, and to willingly embrace vulnerability. This relaxed, authentic state, which can only be achieved through genuine competence and psychological health, is what reliably attracts respect, cooperation, and enduring social influence.